Hello dear students, in this video we will discuss cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is also known as allogamy or xenogamy. Cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of a flower of another plant of the same species. Or we can say cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of flowers of one plant to the stigma of a flower of another plant of the same species. Here in this picture you can see cross-pollination. In cross-pollination, anther present on another plant and a stigma present on another plant. Now it has some advantages as well as disadvantages. First, we will see the first advantages of cross-pollination is that the offspring produced by cross-pollination is healthier. The seeds produced are abundant and variant. New varieties may be produced by cross-pollinating two different varieties of the same species or even two different species. Now we will talk disadvantages of cross-pollination. The pollination is not always certain because some pollinating agents is always needed, which may or may not be available at the proper time. The pollen has to be produced in large quantity to ensure chances of pollination, which means a lot of wastage of pollen. The process is uneconomical for the plant because the flower has to be large, colored, scented and have to produce nectar for attracting pollinating agents. Now dear student, we will talk about some features that favors cross-pollination. The nature that favors cross-pollination. First is unisexuality. The flower may be either male or female and they may be born on separate plants. In this way, cross-pollination is the only possibility. Some examples are given here like palms and papayas. Next favors is dichogamy. Dichogamy, in this anther and stigma of the same flower matured at different times. In some plants, anthers of a flower matured earlier than the stigma. For example, bhindi, sweet pea, etc. It is known as protandry. And in some plants, the stigma of the flower matures earlier than the anther. It is known as protogamy. Now, we will talk about the third condition that favors the cross-pollination is self-sterility. This is a condition in which even if the stigma receive pollen from anther of the same flower, the pollen fails to undergo further growth. In such cases, only the pollen from another plant of the same species can effectively complete the process of setting of seeds. Example is raised florets of sunflowers. Now we will talk about hydrophilus. It is mechanical or structural barriers that check or stop the pollen grains to meet or reach stigma. In some flowers, the pollen of a flower cannot reach the stigma of the same flowers. For example, a hook covering the stigma acts as a mechanical barrier in pansy flowers, iris flower, etc. Now, the fifth one is heterostyle. Heterostyle in this type of plants, the stigma and anther grow at different heights, which does not favor self-pollination. These are the 5 conditions that favors the cross pollination. Now, since flowers are present on different plant, there must be some agencies responsible for carrying this pollen from anther of one flowers to the stigma of another flower on another plant. So some agents are required. The two commonest agents of cross pollinations are insects and winds, but some flowers are also pollinated by certain animals and birds like squirrels, bats, etc. etc. or even by water in case of some aquatic plants. Each category have some special features to promote chances of pollination. First we will talk about insect pollinated plant. Insect pollinated plants are called entomophilous flowers. And flowers. Insect pollinated flowers are called entomophilous flowers. They usually have the flowering characters. The flowers are large. They are usually brightly colored to attract insects. They usually give out scent for attracting insects. They produce nectars, which is food for the insects. The pollen grains are sticky and spiny to enable them to be carried by the insects easily. The stigma is sticky and does not generally hang out from the flowers. The flowers tends to be in cluster to make them conspicuous, especially in case where individual flowers are small. Now we will talk about wind pollinated flowers. Wind pollinated flowers are known as anemophilous flowers. They usually possess following features. The flowers which are pollinated by winds are small. They are usually not brightly colored and often dull green. They do not produce scent or nectar. The stamens are long and hang out of the flowers to expose wind. The anther are large and loosely attached to the filament so that the simple slightly wind may move them. Pollen is produced in very large quantity. Pollen grains are light, dry and smooth so that they can easily be carried away by winds. The stigma are featherly hang out of the flowers to trap the pollen grains. Now we will talk about water pollinated flowers. Water pollinated flowers are called Hydrophilus flowers and they have the following characteristics. First one is pollen grains are produced in large numbers. In some plants, the pollen grains have a specific gravity almost equal to that of water so that they remain floating below the surface of water. In some special cases, male flowers are such that they float on the surface of water till they meet female flowers. Example is Veneslaria. Some flowers are pollinated by birds and they are called Ornithophilus flowers. Take example is Bignonia. Thank you very much.